Joining us now from New York is David Stockman. He was the budget director under President Reagan. David, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be with you.
I got a lot of questions on this. I know you've been working on these issues for decades. So what does it say to you that the administration is having such a rocky rollout of these new tariffs?
Well, it's typical. The steel industry are the crybabies of the Beltway lobby farm. They gang tackle every new president that comes in with their tale of woe. In this case, they've got the biggest sucker yet. And this whole thing is a giant mistake. I was involved way back in 1982 when I negotiated for the Reagan administration an 18% quota on foreign steel. And they all pledged on their honor after 5 years they'd be competitive, they wouldn't need the protection anymore. And here we are, 30 years later, and one device they've had in protection after another, and it's still the same old story. Now, we have a huge trade problem in this country. An $800 billion trade deficit is not anything to ignore. We have had a trade deficit for 43 years running, and if you want to know the truth, it adds up to 19 trillion of trade deficits over the last 4 decades. But steel is the least of our problem. The steel trade deficit is about 20 billion, which is 2%. And the argument that we need this for national defense is actually ludicrous. We produce 82 million tons of steel last year. Canada, Mexico, and Brazil, who I don't think are going to declare war on us or put on an embargo, added another 13 million. So we got 100 million tons of availability, and DOD says at most they need 3 million tons a year. So this is a fig leaf for rank protectionism that's focused on the wrong industry, because there's so much excess capacity for steel in the world that there will never be a shortage, and we're just barking up the wrong tree. The problem isn't bad trade deals. The problem is bad money at the Fed and in the central banks of the countries that have been suppressing their exchange rates. That's the problem.
So when you say the steel lobby is very effective here in Washington and they're dealing with the biggest sucker, who's the biggest sucker?
Well, the one in the Oval Office, that's the one I'm talking about. I mean, somehow he thinks that a 17th century version of mercantilist trade policy is going to make America grow again. That is, isn't remotely correct. And he should be focusing on the real problem. We have 10 countries that we have a massive trade deficit with. Almost 90% of the 800 billion is 10 countries. Everybody knows who they are. It's Mexico, China, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan, and a couple others. They ought to focus on why do we have a big deficit there when the other half, of our trade accounts, we have $4 trillion a year of import and exports. Half of it, $2 trillion, is balanced with 150 countries in the world where we basically buy $1 trillion and sell $1 trillion. So we need to focus on what's wrong with the exchange rates, what's wrong with corporate America that constantly uses all of its cash flow for stock buybacks, M&A deals, LBOs, leverage recaps. They are not investing in competitive ability for us to compete in the world market. In fact, business capex in real net terms today is 30% lower than it was in the year 2000. So that's where the problem is, and this tax cut did nothing for it. It's a giant mistake that's going to drive up interest rates and cause, huge windfalls to Wall Street and the 1% and 10% that own the stock. But it's not going to really address the problem.
We'll see exactly what the president signs later today, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, when he makes this announcement on tariffs. David Stockman, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be with you.